It's not too terribly often that a movie leaves me speechless, but I'm finding it a struggle to organize my thoughts on this one. Um, Until Dawn is one of my favorite games of all time, whether it be its cast of characters, its plot twists, or its gameplay elements. All of it is great, in my opinion. I've said it countless times before in the past, and I'm only positive I'll say it countless more going forward. Um, so when I heard that they had plans to adapt it into a movie, I had a mixture of emotions that pretty much culminated in things like, but do we have to? And must we really? And now that I've seen the movie for myself, the answer to that question is we sure shouldn't have. Right from Jump Street, this isn't the cast of characters that we know and love. And the group has been cut down from 7 to 5. We have Clover, her ex-boyfriend Max, their friends Nina and Abe, who are a functioning couple, I do believe, and we have Megan. And I don't know if this is accurate to say, but something I noticed or couldn't help but feeling, at any rate, is that they may have tried to put some of the characteristics or the roles, I guess, of the people within the original group into our movie cast. For example, there's Melanie, who is Clover's missing sister. She's obviously meant to be our Beth and Hannah, whereas Clover herself reminded me a lot of Sam with her main character energy, and with the dynamic between her and Max, um, I recognized Jessica and Mike, but also a little bit of Chris and Ashley sprinkled in there, I guess, with how he's pining for her and still obviously cares a lot about her despite being broken up. Um, for Nina and Abe, they are essentially Emily and Matt. And then there's poor Megan, who's just the black sheep of the group, I guess, because she doesn't really fit into to any of the characters. She's just the really weird, quirky, clairvoyant psychic chick that has a place in this friend group, I guess. And I can honestly say that I did not personally like a single one of them. I just had no real ambition or ability to connect to any of them. Therefore, I just couldn't give less of a shit whether any of them lived or died by the end of it. Which I guess is a pretty bad omen if you think about it. But moving on, uh, what we have here is the group trying to uncover what has happened to Clover's sister Melanie. She's gone missing, and they want to know where in the world she went. And the trail leads them to this little mining town that historically has suffered a devastating tragedy back in the day. So they go to this house, and while they're there, they begin to realize that they are trapped in a time loop that sees them dying over and over and over again. And I took this as the movie's attempt to adapt some of the core gameplay features where the players' decisions are what ultimately decides whether a character lives or dies. So they're in this time loop where they're dying, they're resurrecting, they're learning from their mistakes a little bit. They're um, learning a little bit more about the situation at hand and what's going on around them and why it's happening a little bit, and then they die again. Um, and the overall game, I guess you could say, is that they have X amount of chances to survive until dawn and escape. But each failure, each time they fail, they get closer and closer to becoming a Wendigo. And they end up blaming this whole thing, the movie that is, that it ends up blaming the whole thing on a witch's curse, which is weird. It's different, but I can see the logic behind it, right? You've gotta find a supernatural means for a time loop to exist, um, and it's fine enough. Like whatever. Then plot twist. Peter Stormare emerges to reprise his role as Dr. Hill, which should have been and could have been one of the only things that this movie got right, if it wasn't for the fact that his presence in this movie catastrophically messes everything up. We learn that Dr. Hill originally came to this little town um, shortly after the tragedy to offer up his services and give people therapy and grief counseling and everything like that. But he decides to start experimenting on people and driving them to a point of madness that they themselves become Wendigos. Now, if you're like me at this point in the movie, you're asking yourself, but what does one thing have to do with the other? How does Dr. Hill's experiments connect to Witch's Curse time loop? May I introduce to you plot twist number 2? The final confrontation sees Dr. Hill telling Clover that the house that they've been trapped in is in itself a supernatural entity, and everything that they've experienced over the course of the night um, is manifestations that are fueled by her fears, her grief, her depression, etc. Essentially, she is the little engine that makes the wheels on the bus go round and round. Surprise, Clover is Josh, too. Um, and if you've been able to stomach the movie up to this point, in my opinion, this is where we go completely off the rails, and it muddies its own waters, so to speak. Because in both scenarios that we're presented with, whether it be the experiments or the witch's curse, the end result, the big threat, are the Wendigos, right? Nobody wants to become a Wendigo. So, if in fact everything that we've experienced, everything that we've been surviving over the course of the night is a manifestation, including Dr. Hill himself, that would mean that those experiments never happened. Therefore, if it's all made up and the points don't really matter, neither do the Wendigos. So, at that point, are we... I would assume that nobody in this group has any prior knowledge of what a Wendigo is or how it works before the movie introduces and explains that to them. So, are we then meant to buy into the idea that at some point during the night, Clover develops this fear of her sister and everyone else that is missing, um, suffering a fate worse than death, and transforming into these cannibalistic creatures? I don't know. And like, here's the deal, right? I totally understand the movie's need to reference or mirror Josh's psychotic break and downward spiral. That's a pretty major twist within the game's narrative. And so I completely understand from a creative standpoint wanting to have that present in your movie. But I would argue what makes that work so well in the game is that apart from it leading to a pretty sadistic practical joke, it doesn't really have any real negative bearing on the overall group. Josh is very much his own character who's going through his own shit. You know, he's Hannah and Beth's brother, which means that he is the closest to the tragedy and therefore the most adversely affected. Um, but outside of all that and outside of him, the group still has this very real survival situation against the Wendigos, where anybody that lasts until dawn and makes it off of the mountain is going to have this very bizarre story to tell. But within the context of the film, what exactly are we learning here? You can say, you know, in Clover's case, yeah, sure, she learns to cope with the grief and the loss and let it all go and start over again. But that's not going to be the case relatable to everybody else that's here. So I guess is the moral of the story that you know, these four other friends of hers are meant to suffer based on her poor mental health? You know, now that I think about it, that might be exactly it. Because there is a point in this movie where she flat out says out loud to the group that everything that has happened to them thus far is her fault. And the movie kind of embraces that, and I guess in a roundabout way, in its own way, says, hell yeah, it is. So maybe that's exactly the point. But regardless, it doesn't really go for me. And I guess the most frustrating part of this whole thing is that, like, if it had picked one path or the other, if it had chosen either Dr. Hill and his experiments being the primary antagonist and reason for the whole thing, or the weird witch's curse time loop, either one of those would have been acceptable. I'm not saying it would have been great. I'm not saying it would have been, you know, as good or better than the game by any means, but it would have been passable at the very least, maybe. But smashing the two things together just feels very cluttered and messy and just so much. Like there's too many hands in the cookie jar. There's too many people throwing ideas against the wall to see what sticks. It's just, it feels like they're throwing everything at you, including the kitchen sink. And it's just no, it doesn't work. And speaking of that, I don't care what your explanation is, how you justify it, how you explain it away. how do we decide? How do we not only get to, but how does it pass? The idea that of having spontaneous explosions due to drinking water. I, I'm at a loss for words here. I don't know. All I can really say is that as a fan of the game, it doesn't work for me. You know what? I can honestly say that as ridiculous as that part is, it might be the funnest part of the movie. It's silly. I laughed. I enjoyed it. I would show other people it, but outside of that, it's just pure. I don't know. It's kind of a fever dream. But I guess that's really all I can say about it, guys. So I will wrap this episode up here. Um, as always, thanks for watching. Feel free to share your opinions uh, down below so we can discuss it if you feel it necessary. Take care of yourselves, and we will catch you in the next one.